Hi everyone, welcome back to another edition of the Velvet Lounge Life. Please take a moment to subscribe to our channel. We put time and effort into these videos. I have to film them in a certain way so that there are no copyright strikes. So I have approximately 70 photos from this week's episode. This is season 5, the final season. Episode 4, and if you can also do me a great big favor, it takes a second to simply give us a thumbs up. Just scroll down underneath this video just a tiny bit and you'll see a thumbs up or thumbs down. Give us whichever you think we deserve, but please give us one or the other so that we have some activity on the actual video. If you scroll further down, like keep on scrolling, keep on scrolling, keep on scrolling, you will see there's a comments area. I think it's ridiculous that YouTube put the comments area so far down, but there's a comments area under the video where you can leave feedback, questions, etc., suggestions. So we're going to get right into this episode. There's a lot to cover. So, this episode picks up with Ross being in Westminster. Yes, he's back there discussing politics, giving, he's been called, if you will, summoned to give an update on how things are going in Cornwall and with Ned. So he gives his update, and basically Ned is doing great. He is doing really well. You know, is he still a little hot under the collar because his secretary was murdered, because people are sullying his name, people are, being racist, people want to enslave people and do all these horrible things versus working together. People are greedy. Yes, he still has feelings about that, but now he knows how to deal with his feelings, Ross is basically saying, and he's doing a great job. On the way back to Cornwall, and Geoffrey Charles was also in London because, as you know, look at his little outfit. He's in the military, and George is paying the expenses finally, as he should have been in the beginning. And so him and Ross, have a really good time talking, reminiscing, etc., discussing love, when they come across a couple of hitchhikers. That's Cecily and her father, Ralph, her evil father, we should say that. And yeah, it's a little bit uncomfortable because obviously there are 3 really good people in the carriage and one evil one, and he has the nerve to have opinions. And of course, Cecily has to be a lady, so she's only allowed to say so much she has to form her words in a certain way. George is still insane. He's actually more insane than ever. And the reason why is because his visions of Elizabeth have dissipated. So he can no longer see her physically as he thought he was seeing her. Obviously she's dead. She was a ghost, whatever. And he can't see her ghost anymore. She's not responding to him anymore. He's calling out. He's yelling out. He's screaming out. He's crying. He's having nervous breakdowns. And he's just getting to a point of almost no return. So he is still really messed up. Now Ross, of course, is back with his family, getting an update, on things that are going on in Cornwall, as they always do. They end up at the pub, where obviously the pub is the quickest way to get your news, and it's the most up to date. And so Ned happens to be there, as well as some other folks, and, they're discussing, things that are occurring. And we actually have a really sweet moment with Geoffrey where he takes his love Cecily to the most sacred place in Truro, which is, I call it the Wishing Well Cave. I don't know what it's officially called, but he takes her to the Wishing Well Cave, and as we know, only people who they truly love and have a super special connection with are brought there. So, their relationship seems to be moving along. And then we have George, who is now enlisting his little stepson. He doesn't know that, of course, but is enlisting Valentine to help search for his dead mother. The child is like, what? Okay, I'm a kid. I'll do what you say, but this doesn't even make sense to me. So basically he has a poor little kid enlisted in his madness. His uncle is like, oh my God, what the heck is going on? I was gone, for less than a second and you're all into your crazy again. So he basically sends Valentine away and calls for Dr. Ennis to come back. Meanwhile, at Ampara, things are great. There's love in the air. There's smiles. People can breathe for a moment. Folks can tell that there's some young love going on. And, it's just a good time. And, Ned does remind them, of his assistant's death, of the fact that people are starving, that nothing is going on at Will Plenty. Where is George? How come no one's coming to the rescue of these people other than Ross and Demelza, himself, and a few others, but they can only do so much. So, Ned still has his fire inside, but he knows how to control it now, which is really nice. Moena is, loving the fact that she has other people's children to teach and to nurture, but she definitely wishes she had her own. Notice how she has her arms folded in front of her to that's self-soothing. So she's self-soothing herself because, she sees her kids in the eyes of everyone else's child that she's become the impromptu teacher for. Big correction. Ross is on his way to do some business. He has an offer he wants to make George. But in the meantime, he can barely get out of the yard with his wife's back turned before Tess tries to make a quick move on him. And Ross says, you know what? I am about to give you a few lessons on life, young lady. And he basically breaks it down to her that she better mind her P's and Q's or she will be out on her arse. And she basically is like, yes, Ross. But she really is like, I got your number. But in the meantime, poor Kitty is, still not doing well. She's sick. No one knows what's wrong with her. She's actually getting thinner. She's not eating. So Demelza calls Dr. Ennis to help her out. Caroline and Horace are getting lonely because Dr. Ennis is like the crap right now. He is all over the place. He's the famous doctor, if you will. He is, working on all sorts of cases. Obviously, he can't disclose to even his wife the patients he's working with, let alone their actual details. So she's sort of like, what's going on? I'm alone. She's usually the least loneliest person, but now she knows what loneliness feels like. And prayers are, being given up that things will get better. No one knows what's going on, of course, with George Warlegan. They have no idea if the Will Plenty mine will ever open. Basically they're being told that it probably will not open. And so they know that it's very risky working for George. And so it was nice to see the entire village come together. They basically had, if you will, a drive where they handed out food, money, clothes, blankets. Yes, there's Dr. Ennis. Guess where he is? Yes, that's George's uncle. He's back at Trenwith. Why? Because George is just out of control. And so, basically Dr. Ennis is like, okay, I'm going to amp up the treatment a little bit and use a little bit of, therapy that will be a little unconventional, but it at least isn't like bleeding the guy, burning the guy, scalding him in hot water, etc. So he takes a look at George, who is sitting there completely comatose. He will sit like this for hours without moving, without saying a word. And his uncle will even pose him, move him around so that if visitors or even the housekeeper or the nanny come by, or even Valentine, it makes it seem as if he's not, just literally sitting in that one place, which he really does. He just sort of like, okay, here are some papers, pretend you're writing. In the meantime, guess what? Love is in the air. This is a poor attempt for me to use I didn't use a stylus. I use a pointer to draw this heart around Sam and Rosina. Yes, there's a little love going on, and yes, Demelza witnesses it, and yes, she approves. They don't know that she's witnessed it. They don't know that she's seen them together in town, so she's keeping that little morsel close to her heart. In the meantime, there's something that happens to Moena that is shockingly surprising, and she literally has a physical reaction to it because finally she gets to see her son again. And she sort of still has to hide from him. She doesn't know if he knows who she is, but he's out with his nanny. He seems to be well adjusted. He looks good, healthy looking kid, especially for that era. And over at Trenwith, guess what? George has a visitor. Ralph, who is Cecily's father, and Cecily. Because Ralph's still trying to get his daughter married to George, and of course George's uncle is all for it. Not only is he for it because of the financial and business ramifications, now he believes it might be the pacifier that George needs to get over Elizabeth. So that's just them in the courtyard. And then, of course, previous to them walking into the room, and when George's uncle noticed them coming up the drive, he ran and positioned George and put some papers in front of him, put a pen in his hand that never moves. Not a hair on his head moves the entire time. They have a long, drawn-out conversation. George sits in this position the entire time. He never moves. And Cecily's father can tell something is really bizarre. Cecily is even sort of like, he must have really loved Elizabeth. And his uncle is like, yes, he did. So they're talking about him as if he's not even in the room, even though he's in the room. So Moena decided immediately to follow her son and his nanny, and because she's, hasn't seen her son since he was basically snatched from her arms. So she follows him and sees that he is very well adjusted. He's having a good time. He's happy. The nanny is treating him really well. She's happy about that, but she's also sad about it. Ned is, of course, at the pub again, and, Ross actually sort of meets him there. He hears what Ned is talking about, and he's like, hey, wait a minute, there are still spies somewhere about Cornwall, and you can't just talk about some of the things that you're talking about out in public. Of course, at the pub, now we have Tess, who's also there with her cronies, and she's like, yeah, you're right, Ned, because remember, she's trying to enlist Ned into some malarkey, and Ned is, there are things that he's passionate about, so what they want to do is get Ned to go over the edge again. And an offer is made to Tess, and of course, which I should probably go back, Tess accepts that offer, unfortunately, but we knew she's not a good character, so she's a villain, it is what it is. And basically she's given a glass of port as well as a little sack of coin to be employed by Ralph, who is Cecily's father. And also, obviously, he's working with George and his uncle, but more so just his uncle now, to do whatever they can to hem up Ned and Ross. And she agrees to join their bad party. So, unfortunately, Cecily has to tell Jeffrey that she is going to have to marry his father, his stepfather, aka George. And of course, that does not go over well. There's no loud explosions. There's no, stomping in the sand, but he is definitely outwardly upset about it. She, tries to break it to him easily by saying, but I thought we were just friends. Okay, that's the worst thing you could probably say. In the meantime, poor Valentine is still wandering about on his own, unsupervised. He's in the forest at this point on a trail when Ross happens to encounter him, and he's like, what's going on? Why is this kid out here alone on this trail? And Ross and Demelza discuss Valentine, Jeffrey Charles. They're discussing everything imaginable that's going on. The fact that he might be making this business offer. He doesn't go into all the details of that. But, in the meantime, you have a spy in your house, so you shouldn't be talking outwardly. And for whatever reason, you're allowing the person who you have a problem with to serve you food. I would never have her serving me food. And in the meantime, yes, happiness and love at Empara still is there. He actually ends up giving her a great big smooch on the lips. And Ross and Demelza enjoy the apple pie. So Ross and Dr. Ennis just happen to meet up, not on purpose, at Trenwith. And, Ross is like, wait, what are you doing here? And he's like, is someone sick? He looks up in the window. He sees George. He goes, is George sick? And of course, Dr. Ennis cannot answer the question because he's taken a medical Hippocratic oath not to do so. But basically, it's acknowledged in a way that, something is really wrong with George. There was a lot of meeting of the minds at the cemetery in this episode. And Jeffrey Charles goes to visit his mother's grave because he's in love with Cecily, but he doesn't have her to talk to about love. But guess who else ends up in the cemetery? His uncle Ross. Yay! And Ross talks to him about love. Basically, follow your heart. Love is fleeting. It may not come back around. It might not be like this in the future. Drake is lucky enough to catch up with Moena because she's been in and out. He doesn't know why. He doesn't know what's going on. He's concerned. He ends up following her. And yes, once again, meetings at the cemetery. Okay, technically this is part of George's treatment. Dr. Ennis is going to bring him over to Elizabeth's grave to prove to him she is not alive. She is never coming back. There is no reincarnation. You haven't seen her. She's in the ground underneath this beautiful stone. So Drake actually now sees what his wife has been doing. And she gets caught, not only by Drake, but by her son, spying on her son. So, finally she has a reunion with her son. Unfortunately, he does not recognize her at all. He doesn't know who she is, except for she's a nice lady, and they both have agreed to be friends. So Dr. Ennis, finally has a little more time with his wife, but when he does, he's, into his medical journals, looking at clients' records, and she's sort of still lonely, and she's like, what's going on? Horace, secrets. And he's like, secrets? There were certain secrets because I can't tell you anything about my patients. Those are the secrets. Kitty gets really ill at dinner, and to the point she's holding her stomach. She has to leave the room. And Demelza puts her foot down. She calls Dr. Ennis and she's like, we need to help you. You need to tell us what is wrong. We can't help you if we don't know. And so finally she tells him that I know that what this is. I think I'm pregnant, and I've been pregnant before, but I lost all the babies in childbirth. And I'm pretty sure I'm going to lose this one too. They don't know for sure, but I mean, usually if a woman, especially back then, lost multiple children, unfortunately, it was something that, continued to happen until they couldn't have children anymore. And so now, obviously, more meeting of the minds. So that was another popular theme in this episode, is Ross and Demelza coming together, discussing things a lot more, which I thought was really good. And they're talking about, Ned and Kitty and Jeffrey and Cecily and all the relationships. This is basically a relationship conversation. Poor Ross. So this guy is laughing his buttocks off because Ross just told him that he is going to make an offer to buy the Will Plenty mine. And he's like, hey, I know it's crazy. I know that George is probably going to be like, are you joking right now? Do you want me to widow blast you even though I'm the worst shot in the world? And his uncle is going to definitely be in an uproar because they rather let the mine rot than to sell anything to a Poldark. But what? George is still insane. How do you know what he's going to say? But unfortunately, this is George kind of coming to the realization that his wife really is dead. She is never coming back. Dr. Ennis reminds him that although she's never coming back, you do have your children. And so he's like, wait a minute, I do have my children. And then Cecily visits Demelza, telling her that, I'm in love with Jeffrey Charles, basically, but I have to marry someone else, and I don't know what to do. Demelza tells her, basically, follow your heart. And Tess gets caught, sort of, not really, but she's in town with her cronies, and Ralph discussing how they want to do over Ned and even George. Like, Tess doesn't like anyone, so I want to keep that clear. She's not just like against the Poldark, she just is a bitter person. So she's like glad to go along with any plans to mess up the Poldarks and the Wool Leggins. And Ross is still discussing the mine deal with one of his business partners, but he goes home, he comes across the moors, and guess who he sees? Valentine, again, out alone. So he offers him a ride, and what he ends up doing is taking him to Mowena's house and Drake's house because there's other kids there, and he and Valentine is, sitting there with the other kids. The other kids are going through some lessons, and he actually kind of disrupts the lessons a little bit. So that gives you an insight to his future. I know what his future is. He ends up being a pretty disruptive person if you read the book series. And there he is with his real dad. He doesn't know that, of course, getting a horsey ride. Yay! So, yep, Tess is riling up the group, the people at the pub, telling them, hey, this isn't fair. We deserve this and that, and whatever. We're going to go march on Trenwith. It's going to be peaceful. Ha, 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 wink, wink. And Ned is like, whoa, hold it. This better be peaceful. Yes, I'll march with you, but only if it is. And it better not get outrageous and outlandish. And so easily, because they're discussing things that Ned is passionate about, he marches with them. George is, like I said, still mad as far as being crazy, like the madness of King George. But like he now is saying, okay, these are my kids. You know what? I have a plan. You know what? Revenge, revenge, revenge. So now he's back to almost being the old George, talking about being vengeful. Demelza and Ross have a conversation about, the things that are going on. I think that Demelza is like, You continuously want to involve yourself with like little Valentine, his father. You know this could equal trouble for us, but I kind of agree, but I don't agree. So she ends up going to town, and just in passing, she sees Tess, who is supposed to be back at the farm working. And back at the farm, Demelza does realize that Tess is missing. They have no idea where she is. And when she sees her, she's like, what are you doing out here with these people? Like, you're marching, you're chanting, like, where are you going? And she's like, you know, I'm going to do this, and this is what we're doing, and we're on our way to Trenwith, and you can't do anything about it. But what happens is, you know, this is the mob going over to Trenwith, is Demelza does end up getting a hold of Ross and some others so that they can get there before things get out of control. This is the door being broken in at Trenwith. And George's uncle is there saying, whoa, wait a minute. All you people just broke into our house. And they're like, we demand certain rights and you treated us like garbage and we're not going to stand for it. There's a confrontation in the hallway, in the stairway, with George and Ned basically saying, come and talk to these people. Just tell them, you know, pacify them. Just let them know that you're not a piece of crap and you really care about them, even though we know you really don't. They're just saying, you know, what happened? You disappeared. You left us hanging. Some of our folks died in your mine. You didn't, you know, like, we have no unemployment compensation. But what ends up happening, as you can see, is a gun is taken out and George fires a shot at Ned. Being a crappy shot that George is, he misses even at point blank range. He ends up falling down the stairs, breaking his arm. And he has a conversation. Actually, he doesn't really have a conversation. Ross talks at him and tells him, basically, get your backside out there and tell these people what they need to hear and get that mine reopened or sell it to me, or they're going to burn this joker down. Minus your child and anyone else that's innocent, obviously. George gets terrified, as he always is, and he goes out there and he basically tells the folks what they want to hear. So he's conceding here. And out in the courtyard of Trenwith, Demelza and Ross have a cute moment, and they basically are like, thankfully this worked out well. And Cecily is now telling, you know, Jeffrey, you know what? I don't give a crap. I am not marrying your old, evil, crazy stepfather. I love you. I want to marry you. So she basically proposes to him. And he, of course, agrees to marry her. And Prudy is like, let's take out the garbage. So Tess is getting the evil eye because she's just been fired. Unfortunately, rumors get back to London. It's a lie. It's a letter that Cecily's father wrote, Ralph, to the guys, the big guys in London, telling them that, you know, Ross and Ned have caused a riot. They broke into Trenwith. They beat up George. You know, they're just, you know, the letter is just full of lies. But of course, this guy is in London and he's like, oh my God, I told Ross not to do this. I told him that Ned has to stay clean so we can get him back to, I can't remember. He's trying to go back to an island that he came from. And that is the end. So what's coming up next week is George has a plot. And yes, it's revenge. Drake is kidnapped. The monarchy is in trouble. Ross and Ned are set up, as we know from the end of that episode, and Tess decides to start a counterfeiting ring to mess up the money situation in Cornwall. That little wench thinks she has some power. I can tell you she will not succeed. So thank you so much for tuning in for another episode. Please do me a favor by giving this video a thumbs up. If you want me to do something different, if it's allowed and it's not a copyright situation, Or if you have questions, please leave them down below in the comments, and have a good week. I'll see you next week. Take care.